Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's panel discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about lessons learned from technology adoption during the pandemic. I'm Sarah Nicastro. I run Industry Resource Future of Field Service, and I'm the Vice President of Customer Advocacy at IFS, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Over this past year and throughout the course of COVID, I've interviewed many service leaders about their experiences, how they've pivoted and changed, and what they've learned during this immensely challenging time. I'm thrilled to be joined today by a wonderful panel who is going to talk with us a bit about what they've seen, experienced, and learned during the pandemic. So let's get started. All right, I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves, please. Marlene, if you don't mind going first.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Pleasure to be here. I am Dr. Marlene Collegy from RICO USA. We are a US-based operating company specializing in digital transformation. And my role is with the service delivery team by providing IT services to our US customers, production print and office print support, hardware and software support, all the customer-facing support for those services, including application, as well as reselling some of our services for IT in the IT space and our service and supplies.
Excellent. Thank you, Marlene. Chris, do you mind going next?
Sure. My name is Chris Beatty. I am the Vice President of Field Service and Customer Support for Analogic Corporation. We are a company that makes core technology for a number of applications in the medical imaging world for everything from mammography to magnetic resonance imaging and computing tomography, as well as systems for aviation security and airport security that you might see from time to time on your travels.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. Manman, could you say hello?
Sure. Thanks for having me here, Sarah. So my name is Manman Malik. I'm the Senior Director of Innovation and Enablement at ServiceMax. ServiceMax is a leading field service management solution. I've been with ServiceMax for about 8 years, started as an implementation consultant and have a team now that drives strategic initiatives to increase productivity and efficiency, learning and development for both our pre-sales and professional services teams. My background is actually in biomedical engineering. I spent some time in the Department of Veterans Affairs, working with clinicians and medical equipment management, as well as the med device space, running call center and field service management. So lucky to be able to use a lot of that background in my role today, where I get to drive some best practices within the processes and tools that we develop to implement our solutions. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Manman. Saul, last but not least.
Well, with the last name Zambrano, I'm used to going last. So my name is Saul Zambrano, and I'm fortunate. Well, first and foremost, thank you for allowing us to support this collaboration in this webinar. We deeply appreciate it. I am Saul Zambrano. I am the Industry Solutions Leader for Software AG. And Software AG is a global company, and we specialize in digital transformation, primarily on the business transformation side, as well as on the integration and API side, as well as on the IoT connectivity side relative to field assets. My background is primarily on operations, advisory, and financial. And between those three, I've always kept my foot to a large degree on the service side of the equation, especially when you consider the asset-rich nature of utilities, energy, and natural resources companies. So thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you for being here, all of you. Okay, so let's dive in. So I think one thing we would all agree on about the last year is that anything we had planned was likely thrown out the window. Flexibility was the name of the game, still is. Marlene, can you start off by telling us a little bit about how the pandemic changed what was on RICO's technology roadmap? So how did things get sped up, slowed down, moved around, reprioritized? Tell us what that looked like.
I appreciate the question, because I could spend probably the next 20 minutes probably talking about how we've been impacted. And I think everyone here and everyone listening in will have the same story. I don't think it's incredibly unique, but for us, we had this 3 to 5 year roadmap that we thought we would just leisurely take our time and, move our services to the best place in the globe that we can that provides the best customer experience for our customers as they're interacting with us, and be able to do that on a time schedule over the next, say, 18 to 24 to 36 months. And so what happened, if you fast forward a year later, is we're fully remote. About 500 of my employees, and we are now in Poland and South Africa, Barcelona, Kuala Lumpur, and now Uruguay for many of our services that we're providing. They're stood up, they're running, they are flourishing. And so when I look at where we were to what was planned and now where we're going, it's certainly an unexpected change to that 3 and 5 year roadmap. I think what we've had to do, though, is we've had to take our current roadmap and look at what do we have to redo now, because some things were rushed without maybe some foundational pieces. So there's redoing it. We have to rethink our strategy, where we have a shift left initiative where we've implemented new technology. We moved to an entire automated call distribution system while we were remote and while we were moving to other countries. And that move alone, along with agent assist and voice recognition and virtual, quality assurance, we established an entire quality assurance program that we never thought we'd have to stand up until this year. That's up and running. So, and again, I'm sure other folks can echo what we're talking about, but we had to compress a 3-year plan into a year or less, and then create new initiatives that solely benefit our customers and especially our agents and our employees. When we think about the correlation, there's a 2019 study that shows the correlation of happy agents result in happy customers. And it's not just an agent smiling on the phone and evoking a good customer experience. It's about true agent and employee happiness that's delivering true customer satisfaction. And that's also been a change for us, is to recognize that this disruption has the potential to create some employee either unhappiness or to have that negative impact. And we also had to be mindful of those things as we made this transition, of that investing in the employee and their happiness to continue growing that customer satisfaction.
Yeah. I want to go back to one of the points you made, because I think it's a really good point, is the idea that, I've talked to a lot of folks that have sped or turned to different technology adoption to sort of provide business continuity throughout the pandemic. And that idea of going back to things that you maybe leverage for business continuity and then reflecting on how you can leverage them for further business transformation, I think is a really good point. And as we, hopefully continue to come out of, the eye of the storm as it relates to COVID, that's an area, companies are going to need to focus on. Munmun, I want to ask you a question related to another point that Marlene touched on, which is the employee journey, right? So we know that technology has been critical in enabling companies to react the way they've needed to during COVID. But there's obviously a lot of other things going on that folks have had to juggle professionally and personally. And there's, I think, this concept of change fatigue, where there's been so much change, challenge, stress, that's just something to be very conscious of. So what have you seen in terms of how companies have learned to innovate and deploy technology in more pragmatic and consumable ways so that they're not overtaxing their employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you touched on some of it, right? Like, we've all experienced this overload of relying on technology this past year, between remote learning for our kids, endless video calls with family and friends that we couldn't visit, so many adjusting to a purely remote environment. And Marlene, you touched on it as well, but there's constant interruptions, and fatigue is bound to happen. companies needed to power through that to kind of keep the needle moving and introduce new technology within their organization, to keep the business running, ensuring customers are continuing to receive the level of service that they needed, especially during COVID times. And this required tweaking a lot of their existing methodologies and shift to that digital first customer engagement, introduce remote work, change business models, and those are all key drivers as part of that. So what we saw actually was there was less of an appetite for like massive projects with long timelines and week-long training engagements, things that were usually very traditional and part of what we saw in rolling out technology, right? And there were several ServiceMax customers, such as Ting Internet. They actually embarked on much shorter implementations and getting technology in the hands of those who needed it so that they can start making an impact with their customers. So time to value really was like the key driver. And that made a difference when it came to focusing on adoption and usage of the application and just kind of running with what they could. We also saw customers such as Corel, they go through a digital transformation entirely, broaden service offerings to include remote operation, monitoring of systems and components. And there was a huge need for bringing automation into the picture to kind of keep things under control. But there was definitely a shift in both the approach of offerings to consumers, but also the mechanism in which they deployed it. So, cutting down the amount of time they spend, taking advantage of when their teams could get together on those remote calls and making them impactful, discussions and kind of getting to the decisions that needed to be made quickly so they could get off the phone and get together things that they needed to get done. Those were some of those kind of key trends that we saw for sure.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And Marlene, I know that, augmented reality has played a big part for Ricoh. One of my favorite stories that I've told many times this year is I interviewed Munters, who rolled out remote assistance to, I think it was 200 employees in 22 countries in 2 weeks. So exactly what you're saying, Mun. It was just like, okay, we need this now, we're going to make this happen. And that commitment to, really getting it out there with speed, paired with, I think, the employees understanding that, hey, this is going to help me continue to be able to do my job, to serve customers, et cetera. But the focus on things like that had that quick correlation and quick impact makes perfect sense. Saul, I wanted to ask you, agility obviously has been incredibly important this past year, but it's a mindset and a practice that doesn't come naturally to every person or organization. So how did you see companies successfully accelerate their innovation when, they were faced with the fact that they really needed to do so?
Sarah, that's a great question. And it's a question that we, Software AG is asked on a regular basis, as that's our business. Our main business is, how do we help customers accelerate their digital transformation goals and abilities? And we do that across all the verticals. So we got a lot of proof points during the past 12 months. And generally speaking, one of the things I'm always amazed, when we approach these discussions, one is I'm a technologist, so I like technology. I like to implement technology. I like to create value. But there's always there has to be an alignment between a company's strategic goals and operational goals relative to their capabilities. And the three areas that kind of came to the forefront constantly throughout the pandemic was one, which is like, how do we re-engineer our business at the process level? So for example, I'll give you a good example of where it's done well versus what was discovered in a lot of other industries. When you think about the financial services industry, right, it's both highly competitive and regulated. So they're getting, they not only have to be good at innovation, but they also have a big regulatory burden that they have to fulfill relative to the markets they operate in. Well, for these customers, having a laser-like understanding of how their processes are executing is very important. But just as important, they need to understand how those processes are working relative to their application portfolio. You can't really separate one without the other. You can, but it's not very elegant and causes a lot of operational hiccups. So for them, it was real, they're very good at re-architecting processes relative to their competitive requirements as well as their compliance requirements. And so they have a very, generally speaking, well-run banks have a good process and application management capability. And they constantly use that to create agility. Now you compare that to some other industries, I can talk to mine about, energy in specific, that's a highly fragmented business units that they operate independently of each other. Financially, they consolidate to the top, but they're not very good at cross business unit collaboration. This is a capability that's lagging, and consequently, to a large degree, they struggle a lot with change management when their business model is under stress, and that business model is under stress. Now, the second area that I'd like to talk about is, in almost every vertical, each of these industries has a lot of data, a lot of proprietary systems, and consequently, a lot of the data is locked up. And if you think about the two things that are happening, kind of two big trends that are happening within the IT innovation, layer, one is the movement to cloud. And so there's a whole concept of, okay, well, how do I move data that needs to reside on my on-premise, as well as how do I move data external, outside of my firewall to some of the cloud environments that I take. And then two, how do I move data even within my own environment when I have a bunch of proprietary systems? And how do I make that data available to kind of advance analytic capabilities, whether it's AI, ML, this is like to accelerate, innovation and the release of value. And then lastly, probably the other piece, I would say I did purposely put this third, but it's accelerating in the conversations we're having. The digitizing of operations and workflow is becoming more and more important, right? So, I can speak specifically to my industry, both energy, utilities, and natural resources. A lot of these distributed assets that need to be serviced in order to ensure they meet their production goals are manual, right? I think the metric I like to use is 25 to 40%, depending on the company, has distributed operational assets that are centrally controlled. The rest are just manually, they're just manual assets that when the field crews are out there, they go read the gauge, they open the valve, they close the valve, but no data is being recorded, right? So consequently, it's just, they're operating on, kind of preventative maintenance schedules. And one of the things that the pandemic exposed for companies who've used that traditional approach is that's not very elegant when the business model is under stress. And you actually want to drive operational excellence relative to centrally monitored, managed, and assets. And the way companies are effectively trying to accelerate past that kind of low digital penetration environment, they're looking at IoT with analytics capabilities to effectively do the service management of the assets that support their production goals.
Okay, good. So Chris, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the fact that we've had some examples here where we're talking about how digitalization has helped companies persist during the pandemic, things like remote assistance and plenty of other examples that have kind of helped companies adjust to a virtual world. But the reality is not all work can be done virtually, right? And technology can't replace every field service, human interaction that needs to occur. And in your universe, that is a real factor. That's something that you had to weigh as you worked through this situation. So you needed to juggle your pre-COVID digitalization efforts with the pressures that the pandemic was putting on the business, and decide what that was going to look like. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, like everybody, I think in almost any industry, we've got our roadmap, and we've got milestones and projects and all these things, that 3 or 5 year plan that.
Did anyone file their 3 to 5 year plan somewhere they can go back and laugh at later? Like, oh, remember when we thought this is how this was going to go in 2020?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that. So, but then came reality last March, and the world changed. But some things remained operational, and I think Saul mentioned, the digitalization of operations. I mean, that's really what our projects were mostly about. Both to enable processes to scale. We've got several projects that set us up for what I would consider, I think most people consider, explosive growth opportunities. And in getting those in place, the timeline didn't change. So we had to start becoming more selective about what we were going to do, right? And so on the one hand, we had employees that are out there, trying to fend for themselves in amidst the COVID pandemic, servicing equipment in challenging environments, hospitals, of course, challenging, airports, although they weren't as busy, still, people from who knows where coming through, and so. We had to support them, both materially with, the right things, and psychologically, let them know that we're there for them, and try and do everything we could on that front. And with all that going on, you just couldn't just pretend that you could do everything else. It was impossible. And so we started getting more selective about, all right, what really needs to get done in order to stay on track. And so we started, picking off, certain accounts, certain elements or capabilities. We just got to keep those ones going. The other ones, we'll slow roll those ones, with the idea being that as things settle down here, we'll start to catch up on some of that, but we won't miss our opportunity to be ready, when one of these large opportunities comes through, and we can continue to be able to support and scale the growth. So it really became a juggling act, of being considerate of the employees' needs and realities that we were all facing, and the stresses, and yet, we had these imperatives that were essential to who we were going to become and how the business evolved. Interesting journey.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, what a crazy feat to have to accomplish, right? I mean, you really think about the lesson of prioritization when you're under that amount of pressure, and you have these things you can't let slip, but you have these real things. Saul referred to himself as a technologist. I refer to myself, I guess, as a peopleist, if that's a term. And what you said about the mental and psychological well-being, the safety, are our employees okay, right? I mean,
right.
That's a very real consideration for where companies needed to kind of step away from this world of technology, automation, digitalization, even though it's critically important. And remember, okay, these are human beings, and we need them to be all right, and we need to let them know we're there for them, like you said.
You had to give them there had to be a pressure relief valve in all that, right? And so, it was incumbent on management to make those decisions and then tell those employees, it's okay, we're backing off on that. You focus on this, let that go, and they needed to know it wasn't going to reflect on them. It's, that it's bigger than all of us.
Right. But being able to prioritize in that way with very extreme and continually changing, at least in the beginning, circumstances, right? Is really impressive. And I think, leading into the next topic, which is, what did we learn, or what can we reflect on that we experienced or changed or, had happen over the last year out of necessity that's worth maintaining, right? So what are those lessons that, we want to try and keep with us as we move forward? So Marlene, let me come back to you. What's one change or, experience, situation at Ricoh over the last year that you think will have a lasting impact, be a lasting change? And just for fun, what's one of your, former processes or characteristics that you are ready to go back to ASAP?
A really interesting question, and I, it's kind of loaded, right? As we talked about before, we moved our entire office remote, and then we made them permanent, and then we went global. And that'll stay. And even our employees that went remote, when we formally announced it late last year, they were like, "Hey, that's great, excellent," and then just went to the next step. Like they expected it. It was something they were comfortable with. And keep in mind, we had a corporate culture of not working remote at all. So for these type of employees, so it was a complete 180 when we look at that type of, and we'll continue that. We'll continue the globalization. And like we said, we had thought we would do it in 18 to 24 to 36 months, and we did it in 6 months. That was just incredible in terms of that lift and shift. So that remote workforce will stay with us. That openness to using Ricoh employees around the globe to help us be successful is something that we'll maintain. When we think about also that driving left, shift left, where we've had to introduce new things, right? Like remote resolution and our truck driver program. We're using level 1 resources to remotely install printers. It used to take 3 visits, and now a truck driver drops off the multifunction printer, picks up the old one, and we use augmented reality to work with the truck driver to install that printer. So it's 3 to 1, and the truck driver does it. And we do, I think last month it was a new program, we did about 600 installations. So for us, it's significant. That'll stay with us. But speaking of augmented reality, we had a really difficult time prior to March of last year of getting our remote engineers and our remote field folks to embrace that augmented reality. This change certainly increased it, but we're moving away from it a little bit, where it's not going to, there's a balance, right? We've trained some of the field people, they've gained experience, but we're not necessarily going to continue using augmented reality at the high levels that we were using it. And we'll probably find some happy medium at a certain point. So we'll shift away from that, even though we love the technology and we think it's amazing. We'll also probably find that level of comfort to use it and balance it against going to see the customer and connecting with the customer and having that human touch as well, which is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, remote communication is an area that your company saw a lot of uptake in as, the workforce became increasingly virtual, more comfortable with those types of tools. Marlene mentioned sort of the open-mindedness that happened either by force or by choice as a result of COVID. What did you see there? And do you think that this, willingness to embrace some of these new tools is something that will stick around, or do you expect, once things normalize, there will be a little bit more hesitancy around change?
No, I think, I'll cut to the end of it and then come back. I think, what we've done in the communications area, I think it'll stick. And I think it's become habit and it's more ingrained now. And I think employees are seeing the benefits enough that they want to stick with it. So we had on our big roadmap, among things was some advanced communication tools that were embedded essentially embedded in the work orders. Allowing multiple ways to communicate and much of it to be captured within the work order, searchable, all that good stuff. And so instead of getting people to, my whole thing was I got to get people off of communicating by email or text, things that you can't collect into one place and figure out what's going on, right? So that's why we did it in the first place. But it was just beginning to roll out when COVID hit. And then we had issues like, first of all, international travel became an impossibility, right? That just wasn't even an option. And we had, customers with equipment down. And so we learned that, we could either, because they had a similar tool and we could connect direct, or you could push the tool out there. We were able to start doing some diagnostic work that, in fact, had there not been COVID, still would have saved us probably, $10,000 of travel costs or something. So it's kind of interesting. So there was a learning point on that. But even so, it took some management effort. I will say, pounding on people to one at a time. You had to get them to convert over to this, and then at some point, I would say we hit a tipping point, and then they started, critiquing each other when they didn't use the tool, which was
Mhm.
when you knew you had it.
Yeah,
And I think
for
that
sure.
was, and I think that was kind of, that's why I say when that started happening, it's like, okay, I think we're going to be all right. This isn't going to go
Mhm.
backwards now. They get it. And we're still dragging a few of the laggards along into, but we're continuing to train, continuing to use, and now the expectation is that's where communication will take place when it needs to be near real time. And it's been, I think it's been very useful, very helpful. So it'll stay. What do I want to see go back? I do think I don't know how you're going to do it over there, Rico, having everybody remote. I think some mix. I think the mixed model is the way to go. It gives people, because of everything is already, it was like this before COVID, that blend between when's work, when's not work was already blurred. COVID has just destroyed that wall between the two. And so the other side of that coin is I think you have to give people flex time in order for them to survive and get on with their lives, as well as be able to support the work expectations. And so where we're headed is that flex schedule with everybody in the office some days. And then the question is, do you pick certain days that everybody needs to be there so that you do get that team feel, and then other days they can be in or out, up to them, kind of depending on the week, kind of thing. So
yeah, good. Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, and I have two more questions for multiple answers that I want to get through. So let's be conscious of time. Mun and then Saul. I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'm going to have you answer in that order. What is your best advice for a company that is looking to reprioritize or, reassess its digital transformation objectives for the post-COVID world? Mun, can you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things I would advise. So I think one would be, don't boil the ocean. Start with an MVP or find small areas with the biggest impact where you can have achievable outcomes, right? So if you can identify your must-haves, things that can make waves in terms of impact for your customers or even internally, right? And kind of improve that quality of life in some way, but can be done in a way that can be broken down in consumable chunks, then the ROI will speak for itself. The other thing that I would say, and I would say this even pre-COVID, and I think it applies even more now, is know the consumers of your transformation and how it'll influence them. So making sure you have, super users, champions, someone with relevant experience with a seat at the table, the knowledge that they'll bring, the empathy for those in those shoes is critical to understand kind of how the technology itself will roll out and how it'll impact their day-to-day. And then the last thing I would say is to focus on, bite-sized content or micro-learning. I think it'll help with focused attention, how much people can consume in a given time. There's been a huge trend towards this for quite some time anyway. And I think since adoption is really what we're after, this will really allow people to flesh out their understanding of those bigger intricate topics by introducing them in smaller topics that kind of build upon each other. So those would be the main things I think I would advise.
Thank you. Saul?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Mun's observations. Very good observations. And what I would say is there's kind of a project level, which I think Mun did a really good job of articulating. There's also an enterprise level, right? And I think to that point, I love adventure, right? So all great journeys begin somewhere. That's always one of my favorite sayings. And, and the key element behind that is that there is a rigorous and thorough inventory exercise. Okay, what are my key applications? What are the capabilities associated with those applications, and what are we trying to accomplish, right? And just as importantly, once we are at the point of production, back to Chris's point, how do we know they're adopting it, right? So what type of metrics and KPIs and tools that support the monitoring of those processes that it's being adopted, and it's not just another change management exercise that I think we've all seen those fail and we've seen those succeed, right? So it's but I think those are that's only observations I would answer.
Good. Thank you, Saul. All right, last question for all four of you, and we're doing rapid fire. So if you can try and answer this in a sentence. So what is the biggest lesson you as a leader, a person, a human being have learned throughout this experience over the last year? Maureen, can you go first? Marlene, I'm sorry.
That's okay. One sentence, I think, to be much more human and much more cognizant of the people side, and connect with people much more intimately, because we're not physically together. I think as a leader, we need to make sure that we are remembering that people are human and we have to love them and hug them and make sure that they're okay.
100%. Saul?
Well, similar, right? Because then I did refer to myself as a technologist, but after many years of experience, I've come to the conclusion that a successful project is one where you humanize the goals that are going to impact whether it's an employee or whether it's a customer, right? And the best example I would have for the the medical sector during the pandemic, their operations just got completely obliterated, right? And anyone who went through that process, right, is like they just did not know what was happening, whether it was on the COVID side, whether it was on the mental health side, whether it was on the elective or non-elective surgery side. And at the end of the day, independent of industry, right? If you come out of that and you're emotionally scarred because the process is not working, what's your immediate reaction? You'll never go back. Right. And it's like, and once you never go back, that's like the worst outcome from any organization. Right. So it's like, so just more humanity and how you design any digital initiative, whether it's for employees or whether it's for the customers that we serve.
Thank you. Man.
Along the same theme, I think the biggest lesson is just patience and empathy, just for everyone around us, and knowing that we were kind of all in it together. My kids learning remote learning, and for all of our fellow employees who were going through it all together, it was just a lot of that togetherness, and just knowing that we'll get through it.
Good. Chris?
I don't have a lot to add. I think these were great comments, and it's interesting that there was a common theme around that. I don't know how you could help but have this whole thing affect you that way. And if you're I believe in empathetic leadership, and if you are an empathetic leader, then you had to look at this and just realize it was just some people were getting crushed by this thing. Family obligations. With kids at home, all you guys with kids at home, I don't know how you survived. I mean, I have employees obviously that do, and it's just a lot. It was just a lot, and to pile on, and it just, and you didn't know when it was going to end, right? And we're still not quite sure when it's all going to end, although we can start to see, a bright light, which we hope isn't the train coming, right? So
yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's a really good note to end on, this humanity and the importance of human connection and empathy, because it's been a common theme in almost every conversation I've had with service leaders since last March. And I think if there's a positive of all of us going through the situation, it is that is the lens through which we look at other people and things now. So hopefully that sticks. And my wish is hopefully next field service, we are together in Palm Springs having a cocktail. So,
indeed.
Yes.
Indeed.
Thank you all so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. This was great.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.